I will tell you, Abdullah proclaims to be illiterate. I take him at his word, and he says that's the reason why he didn't understand what he was getting in the mail when Devon filed the lawsuit against him in Canada. Now, I believe Abdullah's still a Canadian citizen. I don't know whether he still has a Canadian residence as well as his residence in the greater Atlanta area. But so Devon gets a judgment by default against Abdullah the Butcher in Canada. It's about like 1.4 million or something like that. And what you have to do in that situation, you have to go through an international legal process and you domesticate that judgment in the United States. Or if you have a judgment against a Canadian company in the US, you go up and you domesticate it in Canada.
Only on the House of Kayfabe do you get this kind of insight here, folks.
Calgary, Alberta.
Two things before you go, because this, of course, is some videos that we do. Explain to us default judgment and domesticate. And explain it to us like we're five.
All right.
Hit the ad right here.
Now, you file a lawsuit, and the person doing that is called the plaintiff, the person who brings the lawsuit. I'm a plaintiff's lawyer. I sue other people. The person being sued is called the defendant. And the defendant has X number of days to respond to the lawsuit. 20 if you are an individual in the United States, state of West Virginia. 30 if you're a corporation, typically. And so when Devon filed his lawsuit in Canada, Abdullah had X number of days to respond to that lawsuit. And the only thing that you have to respond, if Abdullah would simply have sent a letter on a notebook sheet in handwriting saying, I deny all of the allegations made by Slow Devon in his lawsuit filed on date, signed Abdullah the Butcher. Sent that to the court. That would have qualified as an answer and a response to the lawsuit. But when any defendant fails to file such a document denying the allegations made in the lawsuit, after a period of time, the plaintiff can move for judgment by default. So you win on, and it never gets really tried. What the plaintiff has said in the lawsuit has to be accepted as true at that point. There was no trial. There was no evidentiary backup. It was all allegations, but because the plaintiff wins by default and gets a default judgment, it has to be accepted as true at that point. It could have been 100% false, but because the defendant didn't respond to the lawsuit, the plaintiff wins by default.
So is anybody shocked that the wild man from the Sudan couldn't understand this process?
Man, Mick Foley said he saw him read menus, whatever. So Steve New, you're saying that he would, like, if all he needed was to say, "Hey, I didn't do this," so
and it would have at least moved forward to a trial. You know,
there was no trial.
There was no trial. It was judgment by default.
So that's what. Okay, and then when you said that it needed to be
domesticated, so there's a judgment in whatever province, Canada, right? It's like our states. And so it's a Canadian judgment in Canadian money in whatever province up there. And you can hire lawyers in Atlanta who can take the Canadian judgment, and you file an action in Fulton County, Georgia. Shout out Fulton County. But you file that action down there and you say, look, there's a person that lives in this county with a Canadian judgment against them. Your Honor, domesticate or bring this judgment to Fulton County, Georgia, so that it can be then executed upon. And so there's really not a whole lot. You don't get a second bite at the apple. It's basically a form process where the judge goes, all right, that's a legitimate verdict in Canada. We're going to domesticate it in the state of Georgia. And then once you get that domesticated, it then becomes a Georgia judgment So now you've got a Georgia judgment against a Georgia citizen, and you can start doing all of the stuff to collect that Georgia judgment that you could do if you'd gotten the judgment right there in his home county to begin with, which is things like sell his house, sell his stuff, take his name, take his goodwill. And
can you take a trademark as payment?
Anything that has value. If a court were to come in, because anything that would have value, you can try to execute upon.
Holy shit! So,
so you're saying if Slow Devon had done that, he might have been able to recoup some of what appears to be, he hasn't recouped anything?
Well, I don't know where it stands right now. There was a GoFundMe effort last year to hire Abdullah counsel to try to help him with all of these legal problems. That didn't work out for me. And I don't know where it currently stands, but I know there were negotiations going on. I know that Slow Devon and his lawyers were at least being reasonable. When I last knew of this last spring or summer, I think, they were at least being reasonable. It wasn't like they were trying to put Abdullah out on the street or anything like that. And, that legal story was more interesting than, what's gone on legally has been more interesting than what they showed in the episode,
It seemed to have been pretty easy as someone who just took a few law classes and then dropped out of law school to at least cast any kind of doubt. Because that's a big leap to say that you got hepatitis from a dirty razor blade. Now, I know you're not a defendant lawyer, but I know you have to think like one. Would it have been feasible to get some reasonable doubt that that's how he contracted it?
Here's the thing. It's not Abdullah's job to disprove Slow Devon's case. It's Slow Devon's job in a civil lawsuit to prove by preponderance of the evidence that which he claims. So, and preponderance of the evidence, ladies and gentlemen, is about 50.01%. More likely than not, yes, no. If it's 51% in my favor, I win big dollars. Okay? So,
Johnny Football.
That's right. Slow Devon would have to prove that, yes, this happened, and that's how I contracted that. And he would have to bring medical experts in. And the problem with Slow Devon's allegations is loss of evidence.
You didn't have the razor blade.
You didn't have the razor blade. And some can you imagine? I'd love to be a part of that case where you've got some doctor watching a blood match between two people. And here's the other thing that I think Slow Devon would have a hard time proving. He would have to prove that he was Hep C negative
at the time.
Oh
wow! So
when was the last time you had blood work, Slow Devon?
Wow.
It was 4 years ago.
Point.
Okay, so you're saying that sometime in the past 4 years, and oh God, I would have loved to have tried that case. But there's so much so interesting. But you'd have brought a doctor in who would be looking at these two people bleeding on each other or something. And I guarantee you, Abdullah could have found some doctor somewhere who could have said, there's no way beyond a reasonable doubt, there's no way to a reasonable degree of medical certainty that hepatitis C was transmitted during that wrestling match.
Are you saying that there are doctors out there that disagree with with each other?
Oh, absolutely. For a certain amount of money, you can just about find a doctor to say anything.
That's insane. You heard it here first.
Right.
That's crazy.